great pleasure now to introduce Mr. Rohan Silva.
What I'm going to do today is talk about the ways in which we're trying to support and pulling out all the stops to support high growth firms, technology, and innovation. And the first thing we're doing, which is truly radical, I think, is creating the world's most generous incentives for entrepreneurship and investment. And I hope many of you are making the most of these and benefiting from these. But it was a couple of years ago that we introduced new tax breaks for angel investment. So you now get up to 50% tax relief on angel investment and losses written off as well. And the point of that is that we understand that for many, many years, in fact for the entirety of the 20th century in the UK, the great challenge was finding the so-called friends, family, fools money to get your business off the ground. That first £500,000, that first £1 million being just so catalytic. And so the tax breaks we've introduced for angel investment, I think, are unlocking a huge amount of money. And we're also, on top of that, thinking about the incentives not just for the investors, but the incentives for the entrepreneur. So we've created entrepreneur relief, which means 10% capital gains tax on business exits for entrepreneurs. And we've also applied that 10% capital gains tax rate to the share options for employees joining startups. So if you are a startup, you typically can't compete on salary, but you can hopefully compete in terms of share options and the future value of your company. And so applying that 10% capital gains tax rate to employee share options, if you join a startup, I think is incredibly important. And what I think is really great about this, these tax breaks for angel investment, the entrepreneur relief, 10% capital gains tax for share options for employees joining startups, is that the world is, or at least Europe, is moving in a direction that is oftentimes very anti-entrepreneurship, is anti-risk-taking, and there's a never sort of increasing sort of draconian demand to bash the rich. And I think what's very special in the UK, and it's really thanks to audiences like this and events like this, that the feedback happens. But what's happening in the UK is very different. We're moving in a different direction. We're trying to double down on entrepreneurship, trying to make entrepreneurship and the risks that you take as entrepreneurs and investors really pay and really ensure that you capture more of the value that you generate. And everything we've done there on angel investment, on entrepreneur relief, has come out of conversations with entrepreneurs. And the same is true for the work we're doing to open up the public markets. So if accessing capital at the early stage through angel investment is one thing we've really focused on, a second is opening up the public markets to high growth firms. And again, that came out of conversations with entrepreneurs and investors. And a funny thing happened about a year ago, or last summer. It used to be that when I spoke at audiences like this and had one of the weekly or several times a week conversations at Number 10 and in government with entrepreneurs, it used to be the case that the key thing people raised as a challenge was accessing early stage investment. And last summer that tipped into the challenge around growth capital and accessing public markets. And time and again we were hearing from very smart, very experienced people that a whole generation of firms was growing up in the UK. I'm sure many of them are represented here today. And they were getting to that stage where they faced that invidious decision whether to move up sticks to the US and list on NASDAQ or the stock exchange, or sell out, because they needed a liquidity moment. The entrepreneurs and the investors needed that liquidity moment. And we heard this and decided to take very, very urgent action. And so last autumn, we were able to announce with the London Stock Exchange that we're creating a high growth segment for the London Stock Exchange. That means that if you're a high growth firm, you can list with just 10% of your shares rather than the normal 25%. And you enjoy reduced reporting and governance requirements for the first few years to ease that transition from life as a privately owned, maybe VC-backed, high growth company transitioning to the much more bureaucratic life of the public markets. But that's not all we did. So that's about the main market. That's about the main market on the stock exchange. We also took action on AIM, which is, as you know, I'm sure you know, the secondary market in the UK. And we heard from the same entrepreneurs, the same investors, that there was a real problem with AIM. There was a real issue around a lack of liquidity on that market that was deterring many high growth firms from listing on that market. And what we did in the budget just now was announce that we're abolishing stamp duty on AIM to take out the friction in buying and selling shares. And again, as there's a clamour across Europe for a financial transaction tax, as there's a clamour in Europe, just as there's a clamour in Europe for hitting the rich and hitting wealth creators, people like you, we've gone in exactly the opposite direction here. Abolishing stamp duty on AIM, getting rid of that financial transaction tax, and so supporting high growth firms accessing the capital they need on London's financial markets. So hopefully the companies that are starting to grow in this incubator benefit from angel investment tax breaks, benefit from entrepreneur relief, but then also access the public markets as and when they're ready. The third thing that we're doing to really try and get behind high growth firms and thinking about the barriers that for too long have stood in the way of entrepreneurship and innovation in the UK is throwing open government contracts to SMEs. When we were elected in May 2010, 95% of government contracts went to firms with over 250 employees. So 95% of government contracts went to firms with over 250 employees. And in IT, 70% of government IT spending went to just 7 companies. There was a cozy oligopoly of suppliers. There were a whole set of regulatory barriers. You used to have to provide 3 years' worth of audited accounts just to bid for a government contract. So if you were less than 3 years old, as any company here would be, you couldn't even bid for most contracts. We got rid of those rules. You used to have to submit forms that described your previous experience delivering public sector contracts in order to win a public sector contract. Truly bizarre. And we got rid of those too. And the change that's being made, especially in IT, is absolutely dramatic. And I don't know if you've seen things like gov.uk, which is we inherited 750 separate government websites, and we've replaced them with a single portal, gov.uk, which we built for less than it would have cost to tender a procurement for a contract done in a traditional way. And that is just that's the front door into a whole set of digital transactions across government. And our default is that SMEs get those contracts in future. So as these big, clunking, frankly, hideous contracts that have been signed over the past decade for IT, locking government into these IT contracts for 8 years, 10 years at a time, as those are coming to an end, we're going to clusters around the country, like Tech City, and clusters elsewhere, and saying, here's what we need. So the NHS choose and book system, for example, which is costing us billions of pounds. And if any of you have tried to book a GP online, you'll see just how terrible that contract is, how terrible that system is. We're not going to go again to the big suppliers. Instead, we're saying, here's what we need. It's quite straightforward, really. We need a booking system that allows the public to choose health services and GPs and can make appointments. And there are literally hundreds of SMEs across the country that can deliver that or can get together to deliver that. And that's the way we're going forward on IT. We've placed a cap, no IT contracts over £10 million unless they're signed off by Liam Maxwell, our Chief Technology Officer, and his team. So this really is the end of that culture of public sector contracts, IT contracts in particular, just going to the big firms. As Mike Bracken, who's our Executive Director of Digital, put it recently, he said it was a real stroke of genius that for the past 10 years, all of the British technology startups, all of that innovation, all of that entrepreneurship, every single one of those startups was locked out of government IT contracts. It's really an impressive, considering how many startups there are, considering what innovation there is, to lock every single one out was a real achievement. But that truly is over. And I implore all of you to look at Contract Finder, the new portal we've created that flags up all government contract opportunities. But also get in touch with the Government Digital Service and find out about these big new opportunities coming down the line and how we're turning on its head the old procurement approach and speaking instead to clusters around the country about what we need rather than being prescriptive about precisely what we want and how we want it. So opening up procurement is a huge opportunity, I think, for SMEs in this country, and I think it's going to really throw turbo boosters behind tech startups here and across the UK. And the fourth and final thing I want to flag up to you, which I think is really catalytic, is our approach in Tech City, which is emblematic of our support for clusters across the country. And just as our work on procurement, just as our work on tax policy and incentives for entrepreneurship, just as our policy on opening up public markets, have all come from requests and conversations and pleas and occasionally heckles from entrepreneurs and investors. Well, the same is true when it comes to our approach here. It was on Tech City. It was in June 2010 that I met an entrepreneur called Matt Webb. I'd taken a bunch of startups to India on a trip with the Prime Minister, and on that trip, Matt Webb, who runs a design consultancy called Berg in Tech City in East London, he said there's something really special going on in East London with tech entrepreneurship, but there are a set of challenges for the cluster. He said that the scene was very fragmented. There weren't enough places and excuses and opportunities for people to come together. He also said that investors from the UK, but also abroad, weren't taking the cluster seriously enough, considering what great talent and activity there was going on. And he also said there were a set of barriers, like immigration for entrepreneurs, that were really impeding growth. And so we set ourselves the task of addressing those issues. And I think as we look at things 2.5 years on, I think each of those challenges set out 2 and a bit years ago have very much been addressed. And it's a new set of challenges and opportunities that arise. There were 200 companies, digital companies in Tech City just 2.5 years ago. There are over 1,300 today. Many of them, I'm sure, many more, thanks to this incubator here. And 2 and a bit years ago, we didn't have the likes of Google with their Google campus, Intel sponsoring the Smart Cities Lab. We didn't have Amazon and Cisco and all these kinds of companies contributing to the ecosystem there in East London. And they're all there today. And I think that is that interplay between these global investors and the local entrepreneurial community is a really wonderful thing and has really driven much of that growth. And the Google campus, for example, where as I'm sure many of you have been to visit, and if you haven't, it's a fantastic place. 5 stories, 6-story building, and only 1 Google employee in the entire place. Each floor is given over to a different incubator, be that Seed Camp, be that Springboard, and so on. And we've worked incredibly hard to bring these kind of incubators from around the world to London. We've brought General Assembly to London. We've brought Techstars to London, all with a view to supporting that kind of ecosystem, to creating the places where people come together. Because our motto on this is very much that anytime great people get in a room like this, really good things start to happen. And I think that is something that government can do and certainly will continue to do, to convene and to use our pulling power, such as it is, to attract investment, venture capital from overseas to support startups in East London and beyond. So those are 4 of the things we're doing to support innovation, high growth firms in the UK. Every single one of those has come, as I say, from requests and conversations with startups. There are lots of things that I haven't mentioned. Our entrepreneur visa, our government open data agenda, our Hargreaves review of intellectual property, which is creating fair use exemptions in the UK that allow for much more digital innovation in the months and years ahead. There's so much we're doing, but I just wanted to flag up these 4 examples of responses to the needs of the startup community and the investor community, and to perhaps hear a few more of those kind of comments and questions. I'd be delighted to take questions and to hear your thoughts on things that we should be doing from here. Just this week, we were able to announce that Lookout and Box and Everything Everywhere and Ticketmaster were all opening new offices or making new investments in Tech City. Everything Everywhere rolling out 4G in Tech City before anywhere else in East London. I think anywhere else in London. And these kinds of investments, Lookout and Cloudera this week opening new offices in Tech City, their European offices in East London, I think is a sign of the pulling power of this place. And it's thanks to the energy of rooms like this, thanks to the initiative of people like Jennifer and Eric, that I think those companies will keep coming, but arguably even more importantly, British companies, I hope, will keep growing. So thank you very much. I'm sorry about the microphone drifting in and out, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? We can do 1 or 2. All right, Eric.
Uh-oh.
So one of the things that I've been impressed with is the accessibility of policymakers. So I hope you don't mind me asking, but you've announced that you're becoming an entrepreneur, which is awesome. But how can we be certain that that accessibility, that the government will carry on listening? Because it is awesome. We don't want to stop now.
Well, so I'm leaving Number 10 at the end of June. There's that phrase in tech of eating your own dog food. And having spent so long working on entrepreneurship and innovation and technology, it feels only right that I should take the plunge and try and build a company myself. But one of the things that I'm really proud of and I'm really happy about is we've been able to build a really big team of expertise right across government that is as passionate and open on technology as Eric was when he was with us and as he is today. So just to give you some names of some people that should be in your contact book. Joanna Shields, who's the CEO of the Tech City Investment Organization, took the baton on from Eric, and her team at TCIO is a set of absolutely fantastic hustlers and creative dynamos who are a direct line into government. And Joanna Shields, indeed, just yesterday with the Chancellor, announced the creation of a thing called Future 50, which is a set of 50 of the most high-profile and fast-growing companies in the world. All of them are being targeted to come and list in London and being given support and help as they do that. So Joanna Shields and her team, critically important. Liam Maxwell, who is our government's Chief Technology Officer, is another person that is absolutely open. He's the one driving the SME procurement. He's the one hosting events in clusters like this around the country, saying, here are the contracts coming down the line. Here's how you as SMEs can win them. And beyond that, a whole set of people are going to be coming into Number 10, similarly passionate about entrepreneurship. Ultimately, all of this that we've been able to do on innovation and supporting higher growth firms comes from the top. It comes from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor who understand this, who feel in their marrow that, this is where the jobs and the future prosperity is going to come from. And so that's not going to go away when I leave. If anything, it's going to go from strength to strength.
All right, just one more.
Hello?
Hey.
Okay. What is your opinion of the co-investment schemes that go on in other countries such as Israel and Singapore, for example? And do you think there's a place for that in terms of bolstering investment into startups within the UK?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, we've introduced a couple of co-investment schemes modeled on some of those, particularly Israel. So one is not for this part of the country, but we've got a co-investment scheme for angel investment for the regions. So if you're an angel investor in the north of England, say, you make an investment in a startup, government will match that investment, which is a fantastic scheme. And we also have a scheme called the Enterprise Capital Fund, which is a government co-investment scheme into venture capital funds, into early stage venture capital funds. So a lot of the early stage VCs in Tech City, but also elsewhere, one of the key investors into those funds is government, which is a type of co-investment that we really like. We generally don't want government to be making the business decisions. We want to trust VC investors and entrepreneurs and people who are properly incentivized. But where we can co-invest, as you say, we will do that. And we've just, at the budget, announced that we're putting more money into the angel investment fund and more money into the enterprise capital fund to invest in early stage VC funds. So really important approach, and I think it's something that we can do even more on in the years ahead. There was one question here.
Yeah, sorry, I'll keep it quick. Obviously, you've spoken a lot about Tech City and what's going on in London. I represent a tech cluster from the Northeast, and I was just wondering what Number 10 and think about the regional clusters and possibly what we could learn from what's happening in London.
Yeah, we actually hosted just 2 weeks ago a cluster summit at Number 10. And I don't know if you were there or one of your colleagues.
I invited my colleague, actually. So I'm from Sunderland Software City, but yeah, my colleague actually went instead, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the things we're looking to do, particularly with things like opening up the public markets to high growth firms, is do a lot more work with the other clusters. I mean, the Prime Minister's approach on clusters, I think, is pretty sensible. It's where things are growing, get behind it. Don't be so hubristic as to think you can drop something out of the sky, but where great people are coming together, get behind that. And what we've done on life sciences, I created our life science strategy in 2011. That was very focused on Cambridge and Manchester in particular. We've created tax breaks for video game production, and there are places like Bristol, Manchester, Dundee that I think will really benefit there. So we're really interested in policy that might be national policy, but has really been spawned through conversations with clusters like yours. So that cluster summit at Number 10, which brought together, I think it was about 15 different technology clusters to Downing Street, is going to be a regular event. And if there's ever anything we can do, just let us know.
I think it's time to give Rohan a big round of applause. Thank you very much indeed.